an alert. And here it is. We record our meetings every month and put them on our greateducation.org/advocates-network website so that you can see or share this meeting with others. Or if you're tuning in after today, I'm glad that you were able to find this recording. We want to make sure that folks, even if they can't make it into this space, are able to really hear this information and take action alongside this community of activists. Our goal is the same every time, making sure that we're building community and taking action together. So again, if you haven't had the opportunity yet to take a peek at the chat and see if there are folks from your community who are here, highly encourage you to check out whether there are folks that you can introduce yourself and keep building your network of advocates. Our next Advocates Network meeting is going to be on May 10th. I'm going to drop the link, into the chat. Let me open up my speaker notes so I can get that link. And if you know you're already planning on coming to our May Advocates Network meeting, you're going to see a sign up link pop into the chat here in just a second. You can save this link into your calendar with the follow-up email from Zoom. And so I'm going to add the May registration link here. Hope to see you next month. But what are we doing today? Today, we're going to be providing lots of updates about where we're at on the ballot measure that we've been working on and talk a lot about petition gathering. But before we do that, just want to remind folks about our community commitments, moving up and moving back, creating space for others by sharing our voice and creating space for others to do the same. Bringing that learning spirit as a community together. Not one single individual of us knows everything, but together we're going to learn a lot. And I've been really excited to see folks bring their expertise and their knowledge into this space. So inviting folks to continue to do that. And just as we work together, we're here to advocate on the same issue, more adequate and equitable funding for our K-12 public schools. And we want to make sure that we do that in a way where we're really honoring that we come from different backgrounds and experiences, and we're here to learn together. So presuming positive intent, but acknowledging our impact on others. We're also going to talk today about an update on the social studies standards revision, which is something that we've been working on for the last couple of months. Thank you to everybody who signed that petition. We had over 1,500 folks sign that petition, and we'll be delivering that to the State Board of Education tomorrow. And I raise that as just the ongoing and continuous advocacy that we can do together collectively across the state to make sure that we have inclusive, honest, and representative schools and school communities for all of our students and learners. And so I want to just start off with a land acknowledgement. For non-Indigenous communities, a land acknowledgement is a powerful way of showing respect and honoring the Indigenous peoples that call the places in which we live and work and call our homes. And that we as a country have a history of erasing Indigenous histories. And so just a long-standing practice that we want to make sure that we're promoting just the acknowledgement and awareness of the contributions of our Indigenous communities across the state. Denver is the traditional territory of the Ute, Cheyenne, and Arapaho peoples, where I am calling in from today. But there are 48 contemporary tribal nations that historically make up the state of Colorado. And so we hope that the work that we do today helps to acknowledge that history and move this work forward in a meaningful way. So why are we here? Before we hop into our breakouts, I want to start with some updates about where we are at in this ballot measure process. And over the last couple of weeks, we finished our title board hearings and had 4 final measures that we could have selected from as a coalition. And our coalition selected to move forward with Initiative 63, which is in this big idea, without raising taxes, we can put nearly $900 million into P-12 public schools in order to attract, retain, and compensate our school staff, the folks who are showing up day in and day out to support all of our students with their educational experiences. And so by selecting Initiative 63, we're going to start gearing up to empower our volunteers like y'all across our organization and across the coalition to start gathering volunteer signatures. And so that's going to be our topic for today. We are still working with the referred measure process if that is an opportunity that can materialize, but we can't wait for the legislature to take action. We want to take action and make sure that we're doing everything that we can to continue this process moving forward. So today we're going to focus on the initiated measure side. So just as a refresher, or for folks who might be joining us new, what does Initiative 63 do? Initiative 63 provides $900 million of additional funding for our P-12 public schools, and it does so without changing taxes or tax rates. What we're asking voters to do is to dedicate 1/3 of 1% of taxable income to the state education fund, and this would happen every year. In years where there would be rebates, this vote would allow the legislature to retain those revenues to spend on K-12 education for the purposes of attracting, retaining, and compensating teachers and student support professionals. So that's our educators, our paraprofessionals, our bus drivers, our food service workers, mental health providers, social workers, guidance counselors, the full team of staff that we want to make sure are surrounding our students with care and the opportunity to grow into their best selves. And so these dollars are intended to be supplemental to current education funding, not to replace or supplant education funding that currently exists. So really moving one step forward towards a better system that we hope to see. So how do we actually get this on the ballot? We need about 125,000 signatures in order to get on the ballot. But in order to build that momentum, we are starting with a first phase of petition gathering, which focuses on 3 key priorities. First, we want to educate folks always about the issues that we face in adequately and equitably funding our public schools. There are a lot of ways that our system can improve, and we want folks to really understand which piece of the puzzle are we trying to solve for with this ballot measure. Our first goal is to reignite our network of supporters who will become our soon-to-be volunteers and our future voters. We're not in a persuasion campaign yet. We're finding folks who share our values, who believe in better supporting our public schools, and starting by reigniting our base. And this is how we hope to build that momentum that we need to get across the finish line if we were to push this all the way through to August. So what I want folks to think about and what we want to hear from you is we have a few weeks until our petitions would be printed on our very earliest timeline. And so while we're getting ready for that next important step, what resources would be helpful for you to feel prepared to gather signatures? Essentially, how can we support you? So I am going to open up our breakout rooms, and you're going to have a few people in your breakout rooms that you will see. And I would love for you to answer these questions together, because we're going to report out, and our team will be listening for what resources or supports can we be providing as you all think about gathering petitions. So let me do some quick mental math here and get our breakout rooms set up. And with that, you should see an invite to head to a break. Some of the, thank you, Mary. Would love to hear some of the ideas that came out of your breakout room. Again, we want to make sure that you feel prepared with the resources or the supports to be able to gather signatures. And so what would be the resources or supports that would be most helpful? Feel free to either add them into the chat or come off of mute. We'll take a couple minutes to debrief.
Well, I'll say something.
Thanks, Jan.
We needed some dates. We don't need to know hard dates so we can plan like for the summer and what events and stuff. And I think we had 6 months from petition date, but there's a deadline for getting it to the state too. So we need to know that. And then I suggested maybe, especially new petition gatherers, that we might buddy up. So a database of who you can contact that, hey, let's both be here or both be there and stuff like that.
Awesome. Thanks, Jan. Christy.
Well, in our group, we talked about a few things. First of all, having a notary handy all the time, easy drop-off locations, a list of places to gather and where we're allowed to gather signatures and what kind of permissions we need. And then also, if there's going to be a script or an elevator speech. And lastly, the press release and where we can get that to send to our small local newspapers.
Great, great. Taking notes. Any other suggestions?
There's some stuff in the chat.
Lovely. Thanks, Annalise.
I can read it if it's more helpful.
Oh, no, I'm going to pull it up.
Okay.
Yeah, Facebook groups, support petition gatherers, written elevator pitch, talking points. See that a few times, best practices, notaries, lovely. So a lot of these things we're going to talk about today, but also how we can build this out is very helpful. And so if you have any other ideas throughout the evening, questions, wonderings, resource ideas, please put those in the chat. I save the chat at the end of every meeting and go back through, so I make sure that I see everything that folks contributed in the chat. And so if you have any other ideas, please, please, please add those to the chat, because that's the best way for me to keep track of things from here moving forward. And so with that, what I'm going to transition us into is talking a little bit about some of those quick do's and don'ts, how we can do some best practices, and then we're going to lay out the timeline of where we think we are and some action planning that we hope to take place over the next couple of weeks while we work on getting petitions printed. Like all things in our communities right now, we are experiencing those supply chain issues. But as we get more information on where our printers are at in terms of getting printer petitions ready, I'll share with you how you can make sure you are in the first to know for when petitions are ready to go. So before we get into that, I just want to go over some common mistakes and some of the rules that we want to make sure that we're following. And as I share, I'm going to talk about things that petition gatherers should do and not do, things that petition signers should do and not do. And so after those pieces, if you have any other tips or best practices, we have lots of petition gathering pros on this call tonight. And so would love to really lean into one of our community commitments of together we know more than just each of us as individuals. Would love to invite other folks to hop in and share. So some common mistakes to avoid. First and foremost, I want to show folks what a traditional petition packet looks like. The petition packet will have anywhere between 40 and 80 lines, and each of those lines is going to ask for a few different types of information from petition signers. And this is all going to be about their voter registration. And so this first line is printing their name and signing their name. And a common mistake that can sometimes happen is people will read the directions up here. They'll see the residential address information here and fill it out backwards. So we want to make sure that folks' name is on the top, voter registration address is the second line. Another thing that we want folks to really think about is it's really important that the first couple people who sign your petition packet do it accurately. Because if you can think about it, if someone's filling out the petition and they're maybe filling it out quickly, or they're going to look at the person's signature right above them to see if they're doing it right. And so wanting to make sure that those first few lines are filled out accurately so that the folks who are filling it out after them have great examples to copy. This address line is, again, your signer's voter registration. And so this is going to be their residential address where they're registered to vote, their city, and their county. This is another common mistake where folks will put their city and then they'll put the CO for Colorado for the state. And so this is a place where they put their county. You can see I have this abbreviated here. So for Denver, it's DENV, and I've left it there. So just making sure that there's enough of an abbreviation that folks can understand what that county is. But for really long county names, we don't have to try and squeeze that county name on there. And so that short abbreviation of Denver could be easy. Or for example, El Paso, ELPA, making sure that folks know that that's your county line, not the state. So what petition circulators can do is we want to make sure that we're watching folks sign and complete the petition. When you actually get your petition notarized, you are attesting to your notary that you watched every single person who signed your packet sign. And so making sure that you're watching, not just to make sure that we have good data, but that is something that you are making sure that you're doing as a volunteer. Want to make sure that they're filling out every field. We want to make sure that they're not missing any information. And you'll need to make sure that your petition packet is notarized before returning that to the campaign. Just like folks requested on this call, we're going to have information about notaries, how you can find notaries in your community, whether they're volunteers or places that you can typically go to get notaries and be with a public notary to get that notarized. And so this information will be coming out to folks when you get your petition packets. What we want to make sure that our volunteers are not doing is make sure that you're not making any marks or tallies on the petition. The petitions are scanned into the system. And so we want to make sure we're not making any edits or any changes to those petition packets. We will have volunteers making sure that the data is getting put on the back end so we can track the number of signatures that we have. So you don't need to worry about any tally marks or anything on your petition. That'll all happen at a different time. We also need to make sure that we're not making any trades or paying for signatures. This is a really bright line. These are volunteer signature gatherers getting volunteer signers. Want to make sure that the packet is going to be a stapled packet. So we're not going to disassemble the packet in any way or modify it. We're not tearing any pages out or removing any staples. So just make sure that we do our best to protect those packets. We also don't want to put any stickers or anything on the packets themselves, but if you're using a clipboard maybe or some other type of tool, you can attach things to a clipboard, but just not to the petition packet itself. You also cannot sign your own petition packet. So if you are gathering signatures, you are gathering signatures from other folks who want to sign the petition. You cannot sign your own petition packet. So this would be a great opportunity to make sure that either if you're picking up a petition in person and you haven't signed one yet, you can sign a petition, or finding other volunteers in your community who have petition packets that you can sign yourself. With that, I'm going to stop sharing my screen and see if there are any other tips or tricks that folks have for volunteers. I see really great things coming in the chat.
Oh yeah, I have one.
Great, thanks, Evie.
I always fold it and have the next available lines to sign on the top. So you have to pay attention when they get to the bottom of a page, fold it over. And I use the clip at the top of the clipboard to hold it back. Sometimes people want to read the thing. And so I sometimes put like a little sticky tab, one of those with an arrow or something. So it's easy to find that page. And they can just kind of fold up and read the ballot issue and then fold it back. And I always attach the pen with a string or a ribbon to the clipboard so that because people sometimes have weird colored pens, and I try to get them to use the right color. So I provide the pen.
Lovely. We will talk about the color ink in just a second. That's a great tip. If you're like me, you walk off with pens all the time, so that might be another reason. Any other tips, tricks for petition gatherers?
I don't know that this is a tip or a trick, but I believe that you're supposed to wear a name tag saying that you're a volunteer gatherer. And obviously, if you're paid, you need to wear something that identifies you as a paid petition gatherer, but that would not apply to those of us in the room here.
And we'll make sure that all of the materials that you need, like that volunteer badge, come with your petition.
You also have to make sure that, and you may have mentioned this, that they're a registered voter in Colorado.
Yes, we will talk. These are registered voters. So the address that they're using, the information that they're using is from their voter registration. If folks aren't quite sure, maybe they moved, they can't remember, they might be in a transition. They want to make sure that it's absolutely accurate. You can go to govotecolorado.com, and that's a really easy way for folks to look up their voter registration as well. Lovely.
Cody, I'm wondering if it's helpful, I have never done this, but to have a quarter page or a half page piece of information, because you ask people, have you signed this? Well, I think I've signed that. I'm not sure I signed that, but give them something to take away so they remembered they signed it and they could go and look for other information on it or something. Is that too cumbersome, or is that a good idea?
I think this is the brainstorm time where we should put all the ideas on the table. And so I think when we put together those petition packets of all the resources that we can send out, we'll see how much paper is going out with the petitions and kind of figure it out from there. But I think that could be another really great way of what Evie is solving.
I'd be willing to print them myself. I don't think it's going to be a big expense for me to do that, but is it a good idea? I was wondering. I don't know.
Yeah, I think in terms of if folks want to know more, we want to make sure that they understand this is Initiative 63, so we can keep that moving in people's brains.
And maybe especially if they say, well, I'm not sure, I don't want to sign it, at least they would have something to take home, and next time they were offered the chance to sign, they might do it.
Exactly. Looking in the chat, signature time is a great time to develop support for November. And so I think the more that we can do to make sure that folks are not just signing the petition, but walking away, remembering what they did, and a way to talk about it with others, that's a really great idea. So I'm going to go now into just being mindful of time, but keep it coming. I love all of the tips from folks and the ideas. This is really what we were hoping for. What are petition signers' responsibilities? And so petition signers need to print, or there's one signature line, but making sure that they're using black or blue ink. That is the two required the colors of the ink that they can use. And so we want to make sure we're going to send out pens and all those resources as well. But if you're using your own materials, it needs to be black or blue ink. Again, they're going to print their name as it appears on their voter registration. They must be registered to vote in Colorado to sign the petition. And so they can, if they need to look up their voter registration, they can go to govotecolorado.com. So this is the residence address where they are registered to vote. So if folks have a different mailing address, that's a PO box, that is not the right address. They need to use their residence address where they are registered to vote. And making sure that they're completing all portions of the information. Petition signers themselves have the ability to fix minor mistakes. So let's say they write Colorado instead of their county and they cross it out and write their county. They can make a little initial of their own initials and correct their own signature, but they have to do it themselves. We cannot correct any information once petition signers have left. If folks are making kind of major mistakes, or there's just completely filling it out wrong, we would just cross out the line and then they start over on a new line. And so minor mistakes can be fixed and initialed by the signer themselves, but major mistakes, we would just cross that out and start over on the next line. Petition signers cannot sign for another person. So even if there are other folks in their household that they think would be supportive, if they are not there and present, they cannot sign for other people, even if they know that they would be supportive. Signatures obviously wouldn't be counted more than once. If folks can't remember if they signed a petition or not, it doesn't hurt to have folks sign a second time if they're not sure. But folks, again, only one signature is going to count. They cannot use ditto marks to provide information on a signature line. So for example, if they are in a combined city or county, they can't write Denver and then ditto marks in the county. It needs to be, all of the boxes need to be filled out with that information. And again, this is not a PO box number. This is that residential address for their voter registration. Any questions, comments, other things that folks would add? And I'm going to take a peek at the chat in the meantime.
Cody, I have a question. What about people who can't do all that stuff? Could someone fill in the information and let them sign it? How do you do that?
That question has come up before, and I just want to make sure that I understand like whether you can support someone else in signing the signature. I'm sure that there's a way, but so just so I don't give incorrect information, I will look that up.
Good, thanks.
So if you're assisting someone in signing it, like what does that
Yeah,
look
like they could be not seeing well, or they can't write well.
Right,
And,
absolutely.
so.
Great. I will look that up and make sure that I get that out. We're going to be
That's a
building.
good
kind of that
question,
resource.
Jan, because I often have people say the font is too small and they can't read it.
Great. Other questions, comments, tips?
I learned from Lisa Weil that it's good to have 2 petitions with you. It's a little bit harder to pay attention to, people's writing, but if you've got a couple and you want both of them to get signed and they're rushed to go somewhere, then you can get 2 of them.
Yeah, folks, if folks are waiting in line to sign a petition, we might lose some folks in that process. And so that if you're feeling up to that, and that is something that you feel like you can manage, that is definitely a way to cut down on folks' wait time for signing a petition. Absolutely.
Along the same line, it's always good to have a clean petition underneath the one you're getting signatures on, in case you get a real rush and then you don't have to fumble around to find another one.
Yes, great. Others? Great. Reading some, I see some questions and some tips in the chat. Asking people on their way out instead of on their way in. Great. So let's dive into what are some ideas on how to get signatures. And let me just make sure I've got my windows rearranged. So what we see is there are basically kind of 3 types of people that we might engage with when petition gathering that we want to just be aware of. 1, folks who say they're busy, folks who want to stay and chat with us, folks who might not agree with us and might want to engage in a debate. So in terms of chatty or argumentative people, for chatty folks, I just like to share, thanks so much for signing. I got to get some more signatures. Thank you so much for what you're doing. It's Initiative 63, spread the word, right? Just really thank folks. And then we're on to the next thing, grabbing more signatures. For our argumentative folks, if folks are like, no, I disagree, like, great, thank you for your time. I'm going to go get some more signatures over here. If you remember our big goals for this first page of petition gathering is we're looking for folks who are supporters of public education, who are going to be aligned with our values. And so a lot of this is going to start with our friends, our family, our colleagues, folks in our communities. And so we want to help folks see that this is quick. And so we want to engage folks who might think that they're busy, but this is a quick opportunity, because these are some just short phrases that we want to catch people's attention with. Signing here to support our students and teachers, showing support for public education, making sure that our students have that better future for all Colorado kids, and public schools need our support. Just thinking about those short catchphrases that can first grab people's attention. And yes, this is something I agree with, and I want to learn more. And in that conversation, you might get these are some of the common questions. So what does this initiative do? Supports our students by supporting our educators. We can increase the resources that we have for our educators and making sure that that is helping to support our students. How is the money raised? No new taxes. This dedicates already collected income taxes. These are taxes that we already pay. And so this is how just dedicating those resources to P12. Where does the money go? To our school districts. And who decides how it's spent? Our local communities. Our communities have taken these decades-long cuts to education funding in different ways. And so while this isn't meant to attract, retain, and compensate our staff, our districts are going to know how to best do that. And so really still keeping that power in our local communities. So with that, I'm going to pause and see if there are any questions before I launch into our call to action for tonight, or any additional tips, tricks, things that folks want to share. Evie.
So the question has come up that if it says it's dedicated for attracting, retaining, and compensating educators. And you just said the money goes to the school districts and they decide how to spend it. Those seem to be conflicting statements. So how do we maneuver that particular problem?
So I'll try to clarify, and if I was going really quickly. So the ballot measure, these are new dollars that would go to schools for attracting, retaining, and compensating teachers and student support professionals. This language came out of past ballot measure campaigns and was part of Fair Tax as well, where this essentially directs those dollars at the district level to be used for either improving working conditions of staff or for direct compensation. And so it's a broad opportunity for districts to be able to determine, is it that class sizes have gotten larger because that is how districts had to make cuts? Does that mean that districts are going to be attracting new educators, retaining their current educators? Is it that they were able to keep class sizes low by having to keep wages stagnant, being able to add new staff for new programs, mental health, counselors, guidance counselors, social workers? And so the reporting mechanism in this ballot measure is on the legislature, that these were new dollars spent to K-12. But then districts would determine what it means for them on attracting, retaining, and compensating their staff. What we did with Amendment 73 is we had about 50 school boards from across the state work with their communities to pass resolutions on, if Amendment 73 passed, what does that mean for new spending in their districts? And we would want to build on that for this campaign, being able to work with local communities and their school boards to pass resolutions in the fall to say, if this passes, what would that do for your local school, so that we can share that local narrative with voters so that they know what that means for their school district. Evie, did that somewhat answer the question?
Oh, yeah, that's perfect. Thank you.
Great. Questions, comments, reactions, other ideas? Kathy.
So I had a quick question. So if
Great.
this is just money received when there's an overflow and you get a rebate, right?
This is every year into perpetuity. I mean, it's statutory, so unless the legislature would change, but the idea is that this is before Tabor rebates even take place. So the measure itself has a piece in it that says if we're in a rebate year, that the legislature is allowed to retain those dollars. But this is every year. It prioritizes K-12 education by adding 1/3 of 1% of taxable income into the state education fund. That already takes place. The state education fund receives 1/3 of 1% of taxable income, and voters passed that back in 2000 with the passage of Amendment 23. And so we're building on that Amendment 23 diversion of 1/3 of 1% of taxable income to add to the state education fund. So that's happened every year since 2000, and we would be doubling that by asking the voters to add an additional 1/3 of 1%.
Oh, thank you. That helps.
So this is every year, but we do have language in the ballot measure that asks voters for the ability to retain that in years where there happen to be rebates. Any other questions?
Kathy Plomer has her hand up.
I think she just
Sorry,
asked.
I forgot
no,
to
you're
put
so
it
good.
down. Thank you,
I got
Evie.
Any others?
Someone
Well-
said no abbreviations. Is that true? In the chat.
I've gotten some mixed messages about that over the last week. That was our guidance over the last few campaigns. I'm going to ask for some grace from the group to see if there's anyone who has a more definitive answer on that, because I've heard both.
I'm pretty sure it's okay to say Jeffco rather than spelling out Jefferson. And
Yeah.
it's also okay probably to do Highlands Ranch to shorten that, or Greenwood Village, as long as it's legible and clear. I think that's okay. I mean, if you can get them to write it out and it's neat and it's readable, great, but they're not going to disqualify it, I don't believe, if it isn't written out completely.
Right. The idea is that that was the explanation that I had. The idea is that it has to be recognizable against their voter registration. So as long as there's enough information there to match it against a voter registration.
I do see a question and some answers about charter schools, but I think there's possibly a problem. The district might say they're going to use the money to increase teacher pay, but that doesn't force the charter schools to do it because they have a charter. So maybe the money passes through, but I don't know that the district can tell the charter school how to spend that money. That
So, yeah,
we'll have to leave it to the legislature and the enabling legislation to figure that out, I think.
Great. I'm going to keep tracking questions in the chat. Lots of great questions. I just seen Bev. Great. Yeah, I see a question from Katie. Do you have more information about the ballot initiative and the engagement process that led to it for those of us who want to learn more? Absolutely. So I will, Katie, if you could drop your email in the chat, but what I'm going to do after today is after every Advocates Network meeting, we send out by the end of the week, it's typically on Fridays, a follow-up email. And so I'll be sure in this follow-up email to add just the information that's specific about Initiative 63, the breakdown of what Initiative 63 does. And I can voice over the answer to the second part of that question, the engagement process that led to this for folks who want to learn more. So this process began about a year ago through a coalition called the Great Schools Thriving Communities Coalition, a coalition of 20 plus different education practitioner groups, advocacy groups, social justice organizations, and really started thinking about once districts started receiving federal funds and we knew that those were going to disappear in the 2023-2024 school year, was there an opportunity for us to try to fix the cliff that districts will face in a couple of years by looking at the 2022 ballot? We researched different opportunities. We started to look at the different forecasts, and from there really launched into a stakeholder engagement with lots of different community groups, organizations, elected officials, community leaders around this ballot measure, where we are asking voters to, without raising taxes, add money into the state education fund. And so over the course from last April until about November was our research and engagement process. Then in November up until last week, we were working through the citizens initiated process, which has a few checkpoints of working with the legislature and working with a group called the Title Board. And now we're entering the phase of ballot engagement or ballot qualification. Any other great questions?
Cody, I have a question about the coalition, because CEA just had our delegate assembly this weekend and there was no mention about the initiative. And I'm a little concerned about that because obviously that's 38,000 people, members.
So what the decision that we just made as a coalition was last week, we finished our rehearings. We were challenged. So we received title about 3 weeks ago. We got challenged on those titles. And so we went back to our rehearing last week and walked out with our very final versions. We had 4 versions. And so the first decision that we made as a coalition is which of those 4 measures is the measure that we would prefer. And that's where we landed on Initiative 63. So that was the decision we made in our last coalition meeting. Over the next couple of weeks is when organizations are taking that initiative back to their groups, to their governing boards and their bodies, and starting to think now more about the official process of supporting positions, endorsement positions. And so each organization in our coalition has a different process for doing that, including CEA. And so really that first decision we had to make was which of these 4 is the best version, so that when we're asking organizations to take support positions, that they're making a clear support position on an actual ballot title. And so we're in kind of that process as we speak. Great Ed has taken the position of supporting Initiative 63. And so that's how we're starting to talk about petition gathering with our wonderful volunteers like y'all. And so we'll kind of be seeing our different coalition members work through their processes over the next couple of weeks.
Cody, remind me when the petitions will actually start and what does that period of time look like?
Yep, so we're currently working with the Secretary of State's office to get approved to circulate petitions. And once we're approved, we can work with a printer. So we have to work with that printer to make sure that we can get that printed. We're thinking it's going to be about a 1 to 2 week process to get things printed and shipped. And so we're hoping to have petitions ready on our best timeline, send lots of positive vibes into the universe for this timeline by the end of April. And so we will make sure that our Advocates Network list is one of the first groups to know when our petitions are printed and we're getting ready to send them out. But there's another way that we're going to have folks so that you can share this opportunity with others. And I'll talk about that in our call to action. The second part of your question, Senator, was when are petitions due? Our petitions would be due on August 8th. And so that's when we would turn in all of our signatures. We have to have just shy of 125,000 signatures and to qualify. And so that would be our timeline and our goal over the next, over the next couple of months.
Thanks.
Yes. So while we work towards the logistics of getting petitions printed and ready to go, while my team works on those pieces, we want to know how our volunteers are ready to take action. So you see 3 QR codes on your screen, and there are also, I'm going to click and show you where these QR codes go. The first is one of our key priorities now, all the way through finding solutions to this issue, is we need to educate folks about why our system in Colorado is inadequate and inequitable and how we fund our public schools. And so over the next couple of weeks in particular, we want to give as many presentations as we can about this ballot measure, where we start off with a little bit of a school funding 101. Why are our teachers the least competitively paid teachers in the country? Why are we 35th in per pupil funding? How have we lost nearly $10 billion through the budget stabilization factor or the borrowing from students factor? And what is Initiative 63 as a ballot measure? So if you have different groups that are meeting over the next month or so where we could come in and give a presentation, if you fill out this presentation request form or send this presentation request form to folks in your network, they'll fill out some information. It'll go to my team and we'll handle all of the logistics of setting up those presentations. So if you just send this link to a group that you're involved in, maybe it's a community group, a group of professionals in your world, maybe retired professionals, a book club, a place of worship, really any group that would want to hear about this initiative, you can send them this presentation request form, and that's an easy way to connect folks to this work. We're also asking each of you, and I'm going to put this link in the chat, if you haven't filled out this petition pledge form yet, we are going to be sending volunteers direct information on how they can get involved. And we're asking 3 basic questions. Do you want to carry or sign a petition? Do you want to help us get petitions to other people in your community? If we mailed you a set of petitions, could you help get those out to other volunteers? Or are you a public notary, or are you interested in becoming a public notary? Becoming a public notary is a pretty simple process. You take a short online course through the Secretary of State's office, and you can become a public notary and help us get packets notarized. But I'm going to put this into the chat right now. And if you haven't had the chance to fill this out yet, I hope you'll do that before you log off today, so that we know, are you ready to carry a petition? Are you ready to sign? Will you help us get petitions out to those in your community? Or can you help us be a notary? So those are really our calls to action for tonight, so that over the next couple of weeks, while we're waiting for petitions to be approved and printed, that we don't lose even a second of time. We want to do as many presentations as we can, make sure that we're finding as many volunteers or supporters as we can, so that when we have petitions in our hands, we can hit go and start building this momentum. Does anybody have any questions about these calls to action? Well, with that, I'm going to keep my screen shared so that you can see these QR codes. I'm going to put both of the links in the chat so that you have them. And I will keep the room open if folks want to stick on and ask any questions. But with that, Mary, I think we can stop the recording. And I'll leave these QR codes